For hundreds of years, Japan had been isolated from the rest of the world. Their industries, military, and means of communications had not changed in centuries. However, just because they were not industrialized like the rest of the world did not mean that they were unaware of these changes everyone else was making. They had kept close contact with the Dutch and other European countries while everybody else was industrializing. This period of isolation had changed when U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry arrived with his fleet in Japan. He asked Japan to open its ports for trade, even if they were not going to industrialize. Impressed with how advanced his fleet was, Japan not only opened their ports for trade, but they decided to industrialize. However, this was not going to be an easy task. Japan had very limited resources and a terrain that made transportation of materials difficult. They could not solve this problem by trading for materials because their main industry, silk, had been overtaken by the European silk economy with their industrialized factories. With the introduction of the steam engine to Japan's economy, they were able to take back the silk industry. With the profit from the silk industry, Japan was able to undergo a full industrial revolution. It developed a strong Western-style navy, railways, advanced banking systems, and more. However, Japan was still highly dependent on trade with other countries for most of their equipment and materials like coal and iron. Because of this, they were still far behind the West. However, with the arrival of World War I, this changed. When war broke out, Japan took advantage of the war. Foreign countries of Europe, and for the first time in a century, had a trade surplus. However, most of the industrialization efforts were solely focused on strengthening Japan's military. This military was put to use in the years following World War I, when Japan looked to extend its sphere of influence. Prior to World War II, Japan had built an empire that consisted of Manchuria, Taiwan, Korea, and even parts of China. Throughout World War II, however, Japan lost huge parts of its empire. These losses were a heavy blow to their economy, and for a period of time, Japan's economy was at a virtual standstill. It stood in this standstill until almost the end of the Korean War. The war was a huge launching point for the Japanese economy. In the 1960s, there were two major elements that propelled economic growth in Japan. The first element was the development of a consumer economy, which is an economy driven by consumer spending. This was kickstarted by a plan put into place by Ikeda Hayato called the Income Doubling Plan. It reaffirmed the government's responsibility for things such as social welfare and education, as well as redefining growth to include consumer spending. The second element was a new industrial policy put into place by the Ministry of Trade and Industry. With these new changes, Japan had no choice but to produce more high-quality and high-technology products. So what effect did all of this have on Japan's economy today? Well, to start off, if Japan hadn't come out of isolation in the 18th century, who knows what kind of shape they'd be in. But one of the more important parts of Japan's history happened during World War II. I know a lot of people talk about what would have happened if Hitler had won, but let's not forget Japan. If they had kept their empire, Japan would not be the small island it is today. Its influence would most likely stretch across most of Asia and Oceania. Looking at a different perspective, what kind of impact has this had on the Japanese people? The majority of people lived in crowded urban buildings known to Westerners as rabbit hutches. These are the least of the drawbacks. Overpopulation in Japan's major cities led to limited sewer systems, crowded public transportation, and little to no open space. However, Japan's prosperous economy had its compensations. Most Japanese people had a high standard of living, other than the fact that they were crowded. Although the industrialization of Japan had many drawbacks, the benefits outweighed them by a large amount.